Okay, so let me congratulate you on a job well done. You made it all the way through this course. That was a serious commitment of time and effort that you put in, and you made it to the end. You know, a lot of people, whenever I look at the usage statistics or the views for a given series, I'll see the first couple of videos, there'll be a lot of views, and then it begins to trail off from there. Maybe it's me, hope not. But what I think is going on here is that people commit to learning something, whether it be a language or a technique or an idea, and then other things get in the way and drown out that initial enthusiasm. But that's not you. You made it all the way through this series, and so I congratulate you. You have my respect. You're the kind of person that will push through to the very end, and I encourage you to continue on in your understanding of Visual Basic and the .NET Framework Class Library and learn everything you can in the coming days, because the more information that you have at your disposal, the better decisions that you'll make from this point on. But I suspect that you're going to do just well, just fine. So in this lesson, I simply want to wrap up the series and provide a few suggestions about where to look for answers for your questions and how to address issues that will inevitably pop up as you work at learning more about .NET and as you start building your own applications. We'll also talk about the right way and the wrong way to ask for help on the internet, and a few suggestions on the key topics that you should be focusing on in your self-directed training. First of all, let me say that some of these ideas, especially the more advanced concepts that I discussed at the end of the series, they might take weeks or months of really thinking about to digest completely. I mean, honestly, there's things that I learned 10 years ago that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. It's important to keep pushing forward, keep learning, daily baby steps. Commit yourself to that. Many times I need to read what many different blogs and books and even watch videos and see what each different person has to say about a given topic before it begins to resonate with me and I really understand the concept and the power behind whatever the idea is that's being expressed. Each person who talks or writes about a given topic can say things in a slightly different way, which helps cement or clarify these ideas in my own mind. So life has many teachers. Find many different sources of information, consume them, think about them in the shower, as you're driving to work, as you're mowing the grass, whatever the case might be, and really wrap your head around these ideas, and that helps them to be cemented in your mind. You don't need to know everything right up front, and I think that's one of the mistakes that a lot of developers make. Before they get started, I need to know everything before I can write applications. You don't really need to understand everything there is to know about object-oriented programming. You don't need to know every class in the .NET Framework Class Library. It's impossible. A lot of things will become a lot more obvious after you've made some mistakes. I see now the value of whatever that is. Now it makes sense to me because I'm having this problem, and that would have solved my problem that Bob talked about those many years ago. Okay? So I hope you kept in mind that the intent of the series was to supply the information as a means of explaining the code examples that you might see in other articles or books or even see in videos, or provide some insights that'll help you to better understand how the .NET Framework Class Library is structured and how it operates. Okay, so where do you go from here? Well, let me address that in two ways. Where do you go whenever you have a problem? Well, chances are at some point while you're learning or while you're building applications, you're going to run into an error message that you simply can't make sense of. It happens to everybody. Don't fret. In fact, I think a big part of what makes programming a valuable skill is the experience that you've gained from working through all the various problems and issues that you will inevitably run into. So the good news is that there's a large community of other developers inside and outside of Microsoft that can help nudge you in the right direction to help you push past these sorts of problems. In my experience, there's really just a few common problems that beginners run into. The first is configuration, installation of software like Visual Studio or of the Windows operating system, some permissions issue. They don't have the right permissions for their computer to install a certain a certain program or whatever the case might be. So this could be a strange error that happens in Visual Studio whenever you're attempting to load up a project, to compile a project, to debug a project. And so whenever I hit errors like that, that I've never seen before, I usually take 4 steps. And I've never really written these down, but now that I'm having to articulate them, this is really the process that I go through. First of all, I research. Using the key phrase from the error message is vitally important. I'll usually try to copy the entire error message and paste it into my favorite search engine. So also any error numbers or the exact phrases surrounded in double quotes will get you closer to a solution. So I might spend 10 to 15 minutes just scanning through various blogs or forums on MSDN to find a potential solution. If I'm mindful about the search terms that I use, I can almost always find a solution to what I'm looking for. I think a lot of beginners fail with finding solutions to their problems because they become impatient with the error messages, or they don't know quite how to perform a search correctly. In 2014 and beyond, it's vitally important to understand how to use double quotes around a phrase in order to find that exact phrase using a search engine. Using exact phrases inside of the error messages that you see on screen surrounded with double quotes will get you closer to finding other people that have had similar issues who have resolved the issue, and they posted how they were able to resolve it. So research is the key in doing the right kind of research. Again, using phrases and ideas inside of the error messages you see to perform searches. If you can't find the solution, sometimes a simple reboot will help. So before I do something potentially time-consuming and destructive, I'm convinced that this is an issue with Visual Studio and not my code, then I'll typically shut down Visual Studio and restart it to see if that fixes it. If that doesn't fix my problem, then I reboot the computer and see if that resolves the issue. If that doesn't fix the problem, then I might attempt to uninstall Visual Studio and reinstall it. Now let me stop you right there before you get the wrong idea. It's been years since I've had to do this. I almost never have to do it. You should not start here, but it is an option if you're convinced that something was corrupt during the installation of Visual Studio. But I'm telling you, if you didn't get any error message during the installation and you haven't installed any potentially malicious software programs to your computer, then that's probably not the issue. But if that doesn't fix the problem, then I might even, as a last resort, attempt to completely reset the computer, reinstall the operating system, reinstall Visual Studio, everything. So I call this the nuclear option because you'll spend hours or days going through this exercise. It's been years since I've ever had to do something quite this drastic, so don't start there. That's your last resort. But typically, by resetting the computer, you'll be able to get back to the original state and continue on. So whenever I've had to reinstall the operating system or Visual Studio, it's been so painful that I've begun to become very regimented with how I work with my computer. I generally try to keep the computer that I use for work inside of Visual Studio pristine. In fact, I keep the computer I surf the internet with or play games with separate from the computer that I use for work purposes like Visual Studio and Office and things of that nature. It's not a matter of Visual Studio being temperamental. It's just that there's a lot of resources that Visual Studio is counting on to be unadulterated. So I try to keep that machine updated with new operating system updates using Windows Update. I try not to install anything on that computer that I don't absolutely have to have in order to do my work. So short of something that's wrong with my operating system or Visual Studio, most of the issues that I run into or I've seen beginners run into and experience involve one of several broad categories of problems. So maybe it's the unexpected order of events firing. In a simple application, this might not seem like much of an issue like the ones that we built using the console window application. But as you probably learn when you focus on a display technology like the Windows Presentation Foundation or ASP.NET Web Forms or some other presentation API within the .NET Framework class library, there are many events that are potentially fired that occur for what might seem like an innocuous operation like a form load or a button click. It's not performing the way that you would expect it to. So the solution to these sorts of issues is to set breakpoints in multiple places in your code to better understand when the various event handlers are firing and what order they fire, and identify how the code that's handling two events are battling each other. Perhaps one that's displaying data on screen and the other one that's clearing data from the screen. Okay, maybe they're not happening in the order that you expected them to happen in. And this actually happens to beginners more often than you might first imagine. The other issue that I see beginners running into often is connecting to outside resources like a file or a database or a website. That often presents challenges to those who are just getting started. Again, reading the error messages closely and doing a search on the internet for the exact terms in the error message is the key to determining exactly what's to blame for the given issue. So beware, if you copy and paste an example from an article or a book, you might have to modify the example slightly, taking into account the connection information for your environment based on where a resource is on your hard drive or the network that you're currently on, and replacing whatever that code example had as its connection string or its default locations looking for things on the computer, okay? Another common issue that beginners run into is using the wrong tool for the job. So shoehorning a technology that you're already familiar with into a situation where it really doesn't fit, in lieu of learning a better technology that's well suited for the task at hand. So this might be because you have a fundamental misunderstanding of the technology and what it was designed to do, understanding its limitations as well as other good options that are available to you. So what I recommend here is to continue reading books and articles, keeping up with blogs on MSDN, and stay abreast of new developments and new technologies and APIs that come out from Microsoft. So I have, as you can see behind me, and this is not nearly even a drop in the bucket, I have a large collection of books on programming. Now, I haven't read every single one of these books. Instead, what I do is when I get a new book here, I got this book recently here. I'll take the book and I'll start looking through it page by page and just make a mental map of the kinds of information that it covers. And I might spend 10 to 15 minutes doing this, looking over the table contents, looking over each of the pages, the examples, the screenshots, in order to make a mental map of what's in this resource. And then whenever I need it, I can come back to it at some future point in time, knowing I can say, oh yeah, this book has something I need, and that book had something I needed in it. And I recall reading something in this book that might help me address whatever it is I'm trying to build at that time, okay? So you can do the same sort of thing with blogs and articles online. In fact, I subscribe to about 100 different blogs and use a service online that sends me updates from the blog via email, since for me, I know I check email every single day. So it's in my face. I have to deal with the email, either delete it, at least read the headline, skim through it. Now, if it's something that I think I might need in the future, then I archive it, I save it off, and so that I can search for it in the future. So in these cases, I'm building a library of resources and an overall framework that new and existing technologies fit into. So when I need to utilize that given technology in an application, at that point I dig deeper and become an instant expert at it, okay? And there are a few geniuses out there that have photographic memories. They can look at something one time and they just know things. But for the rest of us, the majority of us, we simply have to be organized, and we have to have a general knowledge of a lot of different areas and then dive in deep whenever the occasion calls for it, okay? So I think one vital skill as a modern software developer is to become great at searching on the internet to help solve issues that you run into. It might sound easier just to ask a question for a problem that you're having, but I assure you it'll actually take longer to type up a question and ask a friend, or type up a question on a forum and then wait for the responses to roll in, than just searching, refining your searches to find a solution, and so on. I almost never have to ask a question in the forums for any software, because a simple search will almost always yield a clue as to what I did wrong or what the issue is. So keep in mind that there are literally millions of people working in the .NET framework and in Visual Studio on a full-time basis every single day. This means there's a huge body of knowledge out there that you can tap into whenever you need it. Virtually any issue that you run into, I guarantee it, somebody else has already experienced it and they've already figured out the solution to it. They've already posted that solution online. So let's suppose you are at wit's end. You can't find any solutions online. Nobody's ever run into this particular problem that you're having right now. You've patiently worked through the search results. Nothing you've tried actually works. You need to ask for help. Well, here's what you need to do to get a resolution to your problem. First of all, become an empathetic requester. In other words, give the people who are trying to help you enough information so that they can pinpoint the issue. This means that you need to clearly state your request. And so here's a checklist of things that you should include in your post. Start by posting your question in the right place. Find the right category to post in. Posting a Visual Basic question in the C# forum is not going to be all that productive, okay? Secondly, choose a simple, clear title for your post so that it attracts attention to the people who can potentially help you, and it saves everybody a lot of time. If I see a forum post that says, "Please help," I skip it, okay? If it says, "Link to object query yielding unexpected results," I think, well, that's something I know a little bit about. Maybe I can help that person out, all right? So that's number 2. Third, a short synopsis of the issue, including the exact error message or behavior that you're experiencing. Describe what you expect to happen and what actually happened. So I get emails almost every day from people that are asking for help, and I love helping people. Some days a little bit harder than others depending on how much work I need to get done that day, but I generally try to help everybody who asks. So when people say, "I have a problem, it doesn't work, what did I do wrong?" I'm like, well, show me some code, all right? Pinpoint, what have you tried already? Tell me a little bit more about the problem you're having. Give as much information as you possibly can to me, and then maybe I can help you out, all right? And so continuing on, there's a couple of things can help. A screenshot would help, all right? Ideally, you use some image editing program to draw a box around that part of the screenshot that you want to call my attention to. Include the code, a code example. Change up any super secret information in your code that you post to forums or when you send it to somebody else. But without a code snippet, we're not going to be able to resolve or help you resolve your problem. And then be choosy about which code you actually post. Nothing's more frustrating than looking at somebody who posts like 200 lines of code in their request. You need to help us and identify those lines of code that might be involved in the issue. In some cases, forums have special HTML tags or shortcodes that you can add to help format the code and help it stand out in the post, or help to highlight the given lines of code that you think are problematic. That would be helpful, all right? Tell us, what did you do to try and solve the problem on your own already? What did you try and what hasn't worked? Did this lead you to rule out several possibilities? Again, empathize with the reader of your post. This will result in a faster resolution. Otherwise, people will start with the obvious issues and move forward from there. Do you know why when you call tech support, the first thing they say is, well, is the computer plugged in? That's because it's what most people fail to realize, the most simple stuff first. So we start with the simple stuff, then we move up in complexity from there, okay? So if you want to skip all that and the back and forth and the time required, then tell us what you know works and what hasn't worked up to this point for you. Also, tell us which operating system you're using, which version of Visual Studio, which programming language you're using, which updates or service packs have been applied. This actually can matter more than you might realize, especially for more complicated issues. Suppose that there's a resolution to the issue. You figured it out, somebody helped you figure it out, whatever the case might be. One of the suggestions that somebody made was helpful, it got you pointed in the right direction, awesome. Now, take a moment and go back and describe what you did to resolve the issue step by step as a means of helping others in the future and as a means of articulating for your own future self and for your own understanding what the issues were and what that meant. So chances are you're going to experience a similar issue in the future, and it'd be nice just to search for your own solution online. I can't tell you how many times I've searched for my own username and said, I know I've faced this before, I know I've solved this before, and I can search online and I can find what I did to fix it. All right, so I help myself, not just everybody else. And then finally, and most importantly, be polite. People don't owe you an answer. I'd love to help you, but if I can't get to your question today, don't be mad at me. I'm helping you, and people who on forums are helping you in their spare time as a means of furthering their own understanding, as a means of just being nice. So say please and say thank you. All right, so you might be wondering where to go to ask your questions. It really depends. I recommend that you start here at msdn.microsoft.com/forums. All right, that forum is monitored by Microsoft employees and Microsoft Most Valuable Professionals. These are knowledgeable people who have demonstrated their willingness to help. A more comprehensive, even if less beginner-friendly place to go is Stack Exchange. So you can go to www.stackexchange.com. And I only say that this is less friendly because you're going to be critiqued for how you ask the question. So just follow the rules. First of all, you're going to want to search and search and search before you ask a duplicate question, and don't take offense if there's criticism about your question. I'd recommend that you search long and hard before you ask a question on Stack Exchange. Virtually everything you can imagine has probably already been asked by somebody. You just need to spend a little time finding the answer yourself. Okay, so I said I would answer the question, where do you go from here, in two ways. I've already answered the question, where do you go from here, whenever you have problems. Next, I want to answer, where do you go from here in order to learn more about application development? So you should now have a basic knowledge of the Visual Basic Programming Language. You're not done here. There's still a lot of opportunity for practice, a lot of opportunity to grow from here. But now you should have at least a solid base to build on. So no matter what type of applications you want to ultimately build, there are a few fundamentals that you should really become acquainted with. First of all, you should learn how to work with relational databases like SQL Server. You should learn how to access the data stored in a database using ADO.NET or the Entity Framework. Both have visual tools that you can start with to drag and drop and configure your settings and your selections, but you'll quickly want to grow past the visual tools and learn how to write code and rely less on visual designers in Visual Studio. But still, that's a great place to start. Next, you'll want to choose a presentation technology to master. Now, you have no lack of options in this area, including things we've already looked at like ASP.NET Web Forms and the Windows Presentation Foundation. There's also ASP.NET MVC, there's Windows Form, there's the Windows App Store style, modern style interfaces. If you're not sure, let me suggest that at the very least you should learn HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And I've created several fundamental series on Microsoft's Channel 9 aimed at each of those topics. Then I recommend that you learn the basic tenets of application architecture, particularly how to split your code into layers of responsibility. Splitting your code into layers of responsibility will help you build applications that can withstand the impact of change. And change, as you'll come to learn, comes from various places. For example, change of business requirements. Change comes from changes in technology. Change comes from defects in the software, and so on. In each case, you can mitigate the impact of making changes in your code by encapsulating responsibilities behind well-established APIs. Now, I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about application architecture on my own website, www.learnvisualstudio.net. But from application architecture from there, what you'll want to learn is more about basic software design patterns and tactics and techniques. And so there's a few keywords that you'll likely want to learn more about. Each of these could spawn an entire book or video series. And I've already alluded to object-oriented programming. That's the biggie. You should learn as much as you can about object-oriented programming. But beyond that, you want to learn about principles like DRY, don't repeat yourself, or DRY, or YAGNI, Y-A-G-N-I, you ain't gonna need it. So this is a principle that says you shouldn't be planning way ahead for the future and building all this extra infrastructure in your code for something that you might never need in the future, all right? That didn't make any sense. A longer explanation of that might be beneficial. There are more advanced concepts that are important, like dependency injection. It's a pattern that guides you towards building loosely coupled objects that can be swapped out, implementations that can be swapped out at runtime, and you'll want to understand why this matters. You'll want to learn about a set of principles with the acronym SOLID. It's 5 principles that help you realize the promise of object-oriented programming in your applications. There's also GRASP patterns, G-R-A-S-P. Again, another set of principles that help you assign responsibilities to your objects as you're designing them for your application. And there's virtually no end to the number of things that you can learn with regards to patterns and practices and things of that regard, and to continue to practice those. You want to learn about workflow, especially you'll want to learn about working in teams and sharing code and using a source code repository. You'll definitely want to learn about building unit tests, which are tiny code-based tests that are continually testing the code that you write. Some have gone even as far to suggest that you should be writing those little tests first to drive the development of your production code in a process that's called test-driven development, or TDD. You want to learn about agile project management and agile software development techniques. You want to learn about defining requirements and user stories, playing planning poker to determine what we can do in this short time frame and what will have to be left out. You may want to learn about agile boards and project planning to assign tasks to various programmers on the team. You want to learn about the nature of iterative development, about developing a spike of functionality all the way through the application to demonstrate a particular architectural decision. Oh, and there's so much more from there, okay? All right, so there's the path that I've given you. Actually, it's going to take you the next couple of years just to learn the things that I've recommended, not to mention the things that I failed to add to that list. But fortunately, again, you don't have to know it all in order to get started. But yeah, there's so much to learn, so little time, regrettably. I've even gotten some people at Microsoft to confide in me that it's a challenge for them to learn it all, and they work and they're surrounded by that environment every day. So nobody just knows all this stuff automatically. But this is what makes software development so fun and so challenging, and maybe a little bit daunting at times. So there are a bunch of resources out there on the internet, not the least of which is Microsoft Virtual Academy. Make sure you keep moving down in that direction, and they'll have a lot more great courses for you to work through. There's also Channel 9. There's also all the resources that are available at MSDN. Allow me to make one last plug for my own website, www.learnvisualstudio.net, which at the time I record this has over 150 hours of training that's geared towards getting somebody who's a beginner to the point where they can interview for their first job or maybe their first promotion. Geared at getting somebody who's a beginner up and running as quickly as possible, pointing out what I feel are the key ideas for software developers and what's in demand today on the job market. There are homework exercises, interaction with me via Q&A for each lesson, and so on. So please check that out when you have a chance. All right, so as I close, I hope you found the time we spent together valuable. If there's anything that I can help you with, please let me know. As I said at the outset, you can post a question. If there's a comments area wherever this video is found, then please feel free to ask the question, or you can write me at bob@learnvisualstudio.net and I'll try to help. All right, so I wish you great success in your career as you move forward. I know you'll do fine, and good luck.